Hey everyone! Tonight, we're drifting back through time, not just a few centuries, but a few millennia. So if you're listening with the lights dimmed, maybe a cup of tea cooling nearby, you're in the perfect place. We're going to wander quietly among the ghosts of the greatest monuments humanity ever built, the 7 wonders of the ancient world. You've probably heard of them. Enormous, glittering, impossible things. The pyramids, the gardens, the temples, the kind of projects ancient kings commissioned when they had more money than sense, and far too many people to boss around. Most of them, as you might expect, did not end well. Crumbled, burned, looted, or simply forgotten. Because of course they were. So, let's dim the lamps of history, and walk slowly through the remains of the wonders that once defined civilization. No rush. Just quiet ruins, and the gentle hum of centuries passing by. The pyramid that refused to die. We'll start, as everyone does, in Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza. The last of the 7 wonders still standing, still smugly intact, still making everyone else look bad. Built over 4,000 years ago, it's the architectural equivalent of that one grandparent who still jogs every morning and complains that nobody builds knees like they used to. It's enormous, about 480 feet tall originally, though erosion and a few millennia of people stealing the limestone casing have shaved it down a little. And it's old. So old that Cleopatra, who lived closer in time to us than to its construction, probably stared up at it and said something like, "Wow. Ancient people were really weird." It was built for Pharaoh Khufu, or Cheops, if you're feeling Greek about it, sometime around 2560 BCE. Khufu wasn't necessarily a nice man. The Greek historian Herodotus described him as a cruel tyrant who shut down temples and forced tens of thousands of Egyptians to haul blocks of stone for decades. Of course, Herodotus was writing 2,000 years after the fact, so he might have been exaggerating slightly, but then again, ancient kings weren't exactly known for their gentle management style. The pyramid's construction remains one of history's favorite mysteries. How did they move such massive stones? How did they lift them? Theories range from ramps to levers to sheer stubbornness. Personally, I like to think it was just millions of years of humans looking at rocks and saying, "I could stack that higher." Today, it's mostly surrounded by tour buses, souvenir stalls, and people trying to sell you camel rides. But if you tune out the noise, it's still the same great stone mountain that has watched sandstorms rise and empires fall, quietly unimpressed by the passage of time. It's the last wonder still here, not because it was blessed, but because it was built with an unreasonable amount of rock. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or maybe nowhere at all. Let's drift east, to Mesopotamia. The second wonder of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Except, there's a small problem. They might never have existed. Ancient writers describe them in gorgeous detail, terraced gardens, lush with exotic trees and flowers, irrigated by ingenious water systems that lifted water from the Euphrates River. They say it was built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his homesick wife, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Which sounds sweet, if we ignore that Nebuchadnezzar also burned cities and deported entire populations, but hey, romance comes in many forms. The problem is, Babylon's ruins show no trace of such a structure. No irrigation works. No stone terraces. Nothing that looks remotely like a giant floating garden. Some historians think the gardens were actually in Nineveh, hundreds of miles away, built by another king entirely, Sennacherib, who apparently didn't get enough credit for his landscaping skills. Others believe the story was purely symbolic. An ancient metaphor for abundance, exaggerated over centuries of retelling until it grew roots of its own. Still, there's something beautifully dreamlike about the idea, a paradise of green suspended above the desert, watered by clever machinery, a reminder that even in the dustiest places, humans always wanted to make something lovely grow. The Temple of Artemis, burned for attention. Next, we drift over to Ephesus, on the coast of what's now Turkey. The Temple of Artemis. A masterpiece of Greek architecture so grand, people said it made the Parthenon look like a toolshed. It was rebuilt multiple times, which tells you how often it got destroyed. The most famous version, the one counted among the 7 wonders, stood around the 4th century BCE. Marble columns, more than 100 of them. A gleaming roof. Intricate carvings. And then, one night, in 356 BCE, it burned to the ground. The culprit was a man named Herostratus. He set fire to it deliberately, not for politics, not for religion, but simply to make sure people remembered his name. He succeeded. So much so that the authorities banned anyone from speaking it, an ancient attempt at cancel culture that, unfortunately, didn't work. Legend says the temple burned the same night Alexander the Great was born. Which ancient writers thought was symbolic, that Artemis was too busy attending his birth to save her own temple. Because of course she was. The Ephesians rebuilt it later, bigger and grander. But by the 3rd century CE, it had been raided, damaged by the Goths, and finally abandoned as Christianity took over. Today, only one column remains, sticking up out of the ground in a swampy field, a lonely marble tooth in the mouth of history. The statue of Zeus, when gods go out of fashion. Let's drift quietly north, to Olympia. The statue of Zeus, created by the sculptor Phidias around 435 BCE. It sat in the great temple at the heart of the Olympic Games, towering nearly 40 feet tall, made of ivory and gold. Phidias was the Michelangelo of his day, a perfectionist with a flair for divine drama. He crafted Zeus seated on a massive throne, holding a scepter and a small statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, as if to say, even my furniture wins awards. Ancient writers said it was so awe-inspiring that anyone who saw it felt instantly purified, which probably means it looked expensive. Sadly, when Greece fell under Roman control, the statue's fate became uncertain. It was either moved to Constantinople, where it burned in a fire, or destroyed earlier by earthquake. Either way, by the 5th century, Zeus had officially left the building. There's something faintly poetic about that, a god so grand he had to vanish completely, leaving behind nothing but descriptions and disbelief. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, architecture meets ego. Now, we drift down to the Aegean coast, to Halicarnassus. The home of Mausolus, a Persian satrap, basically a regional governor, who died in 353 BCE. His wife, Artemisia II, who was also his sister, because of course she was, decided to honor him with a tomb so magnificent that the word mausoleum still bears his name. It combined Greek, Egyptian, and Lycian styles, a mashup of cultures, like an architectural buffet. White marble sculptures line the exterior, and a chariot of stone horses crown the roof. It was so stunning that even when Alexander the Great conquered the city, he left the tomb untouched, a rare moment of restraint for a man who usually burned things on principle. The mausoleum survived for centuries, until earthquakes between the 12th and 15th centuries finally reduced it to rubble. Later, crusaders from the Knights of St. John used its stones to build their castle nearby, which feels appropriately medieval, recycling ancient glory into new fortifications. Today, you can still visit the site, a quiet pit surrounded by low walls and scattered fragments. If you listen carefully, you might almost hear the faint echo of a king who thought marble could make him immortal. The Colossus of Rhodes, a giant who didn't last long. Our next wonder stood proudly, and briefly, on the island of Rhodes. The Colossus, a massive bronze statue of the sun god Helios, completed around 280 BCE. It was built to celebrate Rhodes' victory over an invading army. And when I say massive, I mean it, over 100 feet tall. Imagine the Statue of Liberty, but ancient, and made entirely of metal that would eventually melt in an earthquake. The Colossus supposedly straddled the harbor, though that image likely came from later artists with vivid imaginations. More likely, it stood beside the harbor, not over it, otherwise ships sailing under its legs would have been squashed during the first storm. Unfortunately, the statue only lasted about 56 years before an earthquake snapped it at the knees. The Rhodians, devastated, left the broken remains where they fell for nearly 900 years, too afraid to rebuild, because they thought they'd angered the gods. In the 7th century CE, Arab traders supposedly melted down the bronze and sold it for scrap, 900 camel loads of it, according to one chronicler who, admittedly, may have been rounding up. Still, the Colossus remains one of history's favorite symbols, a monument to human ambition, divine disapproval, and the way all our biggest projects eventually end up as spare parts. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, the final light. And at last, we drift to Egypt again. To Pharos Island, off the coast of Alexandria. Where the final wonder stood, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Built in the 3rd century BCE, it guided ships safely into one of the busiest ports of the ancient world. It stood nearly 400 feet tall, making it one of the tallest man-made structures for centuries, a gleaming white tower with a fire blazing at its top, reflected by polished bronze mirrors. Sailors said it could be seen from over 30 miles away. And in the darkness of the ancient sea, it must have seemed almost magical, a man-made star, watching over the edge of the known world. But time, as always, had other plans. Earthquakes struck in the 10th, 11th, and 14th centuries, reducing it gradually to rubble. The stones were later used to build a medieval fortress, the Cape Bay Citadel, which still stands today on the same spot, gazing out over the sea. Even now, divers occasionally find fragments of the lighthouse on the seabed, quiet pieces of an ancient light that refuse to go out completely. Drifting through the ruins. So, what happened to the 7 wonders? Time, mostly. And people. And sometimes both working together with alarming efficiency. They weren't destroyed in a single cataclysm, just worn down by centuries of earthquakes, invasions, theft, and disinterest. The world changed, and the monuments stayed still. And stillness, in history, is often a death sentence. Only the Great Pyramid remains, patient, dusty, and utterly unbothered. The rest live on in imagination, and in the quiet way we still chase after greatness, even if we know it won't last. Because maybe that's the point. To build something wonderful, even knowing it will fall. To leave behind a trace of ourselves, faint but enduring. Soft outro music returns, slow strings, like the first sigh of dawn. Thanks for drifting through the ruins with me tonight. If you're still awake, congratulations, and also, why? But if your eyes are closing, then the ancient world did its job. Sleep well, dream softly, and I'll see you next time, somewhere else in history. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're drifting back into the royal bedchambers of history, which, as you'll soon see, was not always the glamorous affair artists painted. Because when your family tree is more of a wreath, and your idea of romance involves your cousin 3 times removed, things tend to go wrong. So settle in. Fluff your pillow. Dim the lights. And let's quietly explore how centuries of political matchmaking, dynastic paranoia, and questionable genetics shaped, and occasionally doomed, Europe's most powerful families. This isn't a story of love. It's a story of lineage. And how, quite often, those 2 things had no business being in the same room. The Habsburgs, a dynasty folding in on itself. Let's start, gently, with the Habsburgs. A family so devoted to keeping their power in the family, they eventually kept everything in the family, including their jawlines. For centuries, the Habsburgs ruled much of Europe, Austria, Spain, Hungary, the Holy Roman Empire, and quite a few places that didn't ask for it. They believed that intermarriage would preserve their divine right to rule. What it actually preserved was a tragic and very visible genetic condition, the Habsburg jaw. The family portrait gallery of the Habsburgs is, frankly, one of the best visual arguments for genetic diversity ever painted. Prominent lower lips, long faces, drooping chins, by the 1600s, many of them struggled to chew properly. And the family line struggled to continue. The most infamous example was Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, he was the result of generations of unrelenting inbreeding. His parents were uncle and niece. He was small, sickly, drooled constantly, and had such a severe underbite that he couldn't close his mouth. Court physicians recorded that he had trouble speaking, walking, and even eating. He was also known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched, because people genuinely thought his problems must be the result of a curse. But no, it was just genealogy taken far too seriously. Charles tried desperately to produce an heir, but, as with most of his bodily functions, it didn't work. When he died in 1700, the Spanish branch of the Habsburg line died with him. The European powers immediately went to war over who should inherit Spain, because naturally, no royal tragedy can ever end quietly. So the Habsburgs taught history a lesson. You can consolidate your empire through marriage. But only for so long before biology steps in and files an official complaint. The Tudors, so many marriages, so little success. Now let's drift north, to England, where Henry VIII made marriage less about love and more about national policy. Henry was charming, athletic, and handsome at first. Then, somewhere between his fourth feast and his fifth annulment, things began to unravel. He married 6 times. 2 wives executed. 2 divorced. 1 died. And 1, the last, outlived him, possibly through a combination of luck and keeping her opinions to herself. Henry's obsession with producing a male heir changed English history. When his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, failed to give him one, he decided the problem was her fault, and God's. So he broke from the Catholic Church entirely, because of course he did, and declared himself head of the Church of England. All to get a divorce. Catherine was followed by Anne Boleyn, who also failed to deliver a son and was promptly executed on charges of adultery, which, historians generally agree, were made up. And was followed by Jane Seymour, who finally gave Henry a son, Edward VI, and then died shortly after childbirth. Henry was devastated. Until he wasn't. By the time he married Anne of Cleves, his fourth wife, Henry was overweight, ulcer-ridden, and irritable. He famously claimed she looked like a Flanders mare. And was, by all accounts, polite and relieved when he divorced her 6 months later. After that came Catherine Howard, executed for infidelity, and finally Catherine Parr, who managed to outlast him through sheer political caution. Henry's children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each took the throne in turn, and while they were fascinating monarchs in their own right, none of them produced lasting heirs. The Tudor line, much like Henry's waistline, collapsed under the weight of its own excess. The Medici, too much art, too little bloodline. Let's drift to Italy, Florence, to be precise, home of the Medici family. They were the great patrons of the Renaissance, the kind of family that made the world beautiful and themselves miserable. The Medici started as bankers. Very successful ones. They financed popes, palaces, and painters. And like many people who suddenly find themselves rich beyond reason, they decided that marrying into royalty would make them legitimate. It did. But it also tangled them into Europe's grand web of cousinly marriages. One of the saddest examples is Cosimo II's daughter, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici. She was cultured, intelligent, and artistic, the last of her line. When she married into the Wittelsbach family of Germany, the union was childless. When she died in 1743, the Medici bloodline ended. Centuries of power, art, and political maneuvering, gone with a sigh. Still, she left one parting gift. She bequeathed the Medici art collections to the city of Florence, on the condition they never leave the city. That's why the Uffizi Gallery exists today. A quiet legacy of beauty, born from a family that spent generations marrying itself out of existence. The Romanovs, when cousins collide. And now, to Russia. Because what bedtime story is complete without imperial collapse and hemophilia? The Romanovs were Europe's last great autocratic dynasty, ruling Russia for more than 300 years. By the late 19th century, they were deeply entangled with the other royal families of Europe, the British, the German, the Danish, all branches of one immense, intermarried tree. This meant their genetics were shared. Which became a problem when Tsar Nicholas II married Alexandra of Hesse, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Victoria's family carried the gene for hemophilia, a blood disorder that prevents clotting. Their only son, Alexei, inherited it. Even minor injuries could lead to life-threatening bleeding. Desperate for a cure, Alexandra turned to a wandering mystic named Grigory Rasputin. He claimed to have divine healing powers, and, alarmingly, sometimes seemed to help. Probably because he discouraged doctors from giving Alexei aspirin, which made bleeding worse. So in a way, Rasputin's best miracle was simply not prescribing painkillers. His growing influence over the royal family helped erode public trust, contributing to the revolution that would wipe the Romanovs off the map. The dynasty ended, in part, because of one genetic mutation passed down through generations of royal matchmaking. The ultimate example of how personal choices in palaces can topple empires. The Bourbons, beauty, madness, and too many Louises. Let's drift gently to France. The House of Bourbon, famous for its glittering court life, endless Louises, and a staggering ability to ignore reality. Take Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ruled for 72 years, impressive longevity, though less so for the people who had to work under him. He married his cousin, Maria Theresa of Spain, to keep the peace between two rival branches of the same extended family. She was quiet, pious, and completely overshadowed by his mistresses. Their children married other Bourbons, Habsburgs, and cousins, because apparently, the lesson of genetics hadn't yet made it to Versailles. By the 18th century, inbreeding had quietly begun to manifest in smaller ways: weak immune systems, frail children, occasional signs of hereditary illness. Then came Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Their marriage was meant to seal a fragile alliance between France and Austria. It was awkward, slow to consummate, and politically catastrophic. Louis preferred locks and clocks to romance. Marie preferred parties. And both preferred pretending that France's finances weren't collapsing. Theirs wasn't genetically doomed, but it was emotionally barren, and it ended, quite famously, without heads. Another kind of inheritance, in a sense. The Windsors, modern royal genetics, ancient habits. Now let's drift into the 20th century. By now, European royalty had mostly learned their genetic lesson, though, being royalty, mostly is a generous term. Queen Victoria's descendants still carried the hemophilia gene, which appeared in royal families across Europe, Spain, Russia, Prussia. It became known as the royal disease. Even in the modern era, the British royal family has had moments where old habits persist. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip were related, both great-great-grandchildren of Victoria. Which, to be fair, is distant by royal standards. Practically exotic. Today, genetics and medicine have mostly broken the curse. But the legacy of those centuries of careful and careless pairings lingers in the DNA of modern monarchs. A reminder that the pursuit of purity, whether of bloodline or belief, often leads to decline. Drifting out of the royal bedrooms. So what do all these stories have in common? They show how empires can crumble not from wars or invasions, but from dinner tables and marriage contracts. The royals who ruled the world couldn't resist marrying reflections of themselves, and in doing so, they slowly erased their own vitality. Love became diplomacy. And children became collateral. Maybe that's why we still find them fascinating, not because they were divine, but because they were so painfully human. Trapped in gold cages, doomed by their own choices, and desperately trying to keep their crowns balanced on heads that shared the same ancestors. Soft closing music, faint harp, drifting wind. So, if you're still awake, congratulations. You've survived a night among Europe's most unfortunate couples. But if you're already dreaming, don't worry. You're probably somewhere in a candlelit hall, drifting past portraits of pale kings and weary queens, whose eyes seem to follow you, quietly, eternally, from the other side of history. Sleep well, traveler. And I'll see you next time, for another story from the long, strange night of the past. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're drifting back into the castles and nurseries of medieval Europe, places filled with silk, incense, and the faint sound of coughing. Because if there's one thing royal childhoods weren't, it's normal. While peasant children learned to chase chickens and survive winters, royal heirs were wrapped in velvet, spoon-fed superstition, and told from birth that God had personally chosen them to rule. Which is, as you might imagine, not ideal for one's emotional development. So, settle in. Pull your blanket close. And let's quietly wander through the pale, feverish childhoods of kings and queens who were raised to rule, but rarely raised well. The royal cradle, where privilege meets panic. Let's start with the basics. A royal birth in the Middle Ages was not a private affair. It was a public spectacle. When a queen went into labor, her chamber filled with ladies-in-waiting, priests, midwives, and an assortment of nervous nobles, all waiting to make sure the baby was legitimate, alive, and preferably male. Because nothing said blessed by God quite like 30 people crowding a room and shouting advice. If the child survived the birth, which, statistically, was a big if, the next step was baptism. The sooner the better, because medieval theology wasn't subtle about what happened to unbaptized infants. Royal babies were immediately handed to wet nurses, since breastfeeding was considered beneath queens. That meant the future ruler's first bond was usually not with their mother, but with an overworked woman from the countryside who was promptly forbidden from caring for her own baby. It was a great system. For no one. And so, from day one, most royal children were raised in a fog of ceremony, superstition, and political expectation. Loved, yes, but usually from a distance. Little kings, born to rule, raised to panic. Now let's drift to England, around the year 1216. A 9-year-old boy named Henry III is about to become king. His father, King John, yes, the one who lost the crown jewels in a swamp, had just died. Henry was crowned quickly, with a small gold crown borrowed from his mother's jewelry box. The archbishop anointed him, a few barons swore allegiance, and that was that. The child was now ruler of a kingdom torn apart by civil war. For the next decade, adults ruled in his name. He grew up surrounded by advisors, none of whom agreed on anything, except that they all knew better than the boy on the throne. By the time he came of age, Henry was deeply pious, soft-spoken, and perpetually anxious, traits that made him a terrible medieval king, but a perfect bedtime story protagonist. He would reign for more than 50 years, building churches, fretting over budgets, and being repeatedly bullied by his nobles. Because sometimes, the hardest thing about being born a king is learning that nobody actually listens to you. Edward VI, the boy who sneezed on the throne. Fast forward a few centuries. England again. This time, it's Edward VI, son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, the one who finally gave him that long-awaited male heir. Edward became king at age 9. He was intelligent, devout, and devastatingly fragile. One ambassador described him as a prince of good disposition, but of delicate constitution. Translation: if someone coughed near him, he might not make it to supper. Raised among tutors and theologians, Edward's childhood was more academic than affectionate. His father had died when he was 6, his mother when he was barely born, and the adults around him saw not a boy, but a symbol, the Protestant future of England. He wrote earnestly in his diary, sometimes noting events like, "Today, I caught a cold." It's a small, heartbreaking glimpse into a lonely child trying to understand a world that treated him like a prophecy. Edward ruled for just 6 years before dying of tuberculosis at 15, one of those quiet royal tragedies that somehow feels more inevitable than dramatic. Louis XIII, the quiet child of a very loud court. Now let's drift to France, to Louis XIII, born in 1601, son of Henry IV and Marie de Medici. He grew up in the Louvre, not yet an art museum, just a particularly drafty palace filled with intrigue. His father was assassinated when Louis was 8. His mother became regent, and their relationship quickly turned into a lifetime of mutual suspicion. Louis was shy, withdrawn, and painfully introverted. At age 10, he was technically king, though his mother handled everything. As a child, he struggled to speak in public and avoided eye contact, symptoms modern psychologists might recognize as anxiety, but at the time were interpreted as royal gravity. When he finally asserted himself as ruler, he did so not with fiery speeches but with quiet, relentless obedience to his advisor, Cardinal Richelieu. Louis XII's childhood taught him one lasting lesson, that love and control were the same thing. A belief he would pass on to his son, the far more flamboyant Louis XIV. Charles VI of France, the boy who lost his mind. Not all royal childhoods ended in melancholy, some spiraled into madness. Charles VI became King of France at age 11. His father, Charles V, was intelligent and cautious. His mother, Jean of Bourbon, struggled with mental illness. From a young age, Charles was adored, gentle, charming, a beloved child of France. But behind the pageantry, the seeds of instability were already there. At 24, during a summer military campaign, Charles suffered his first psychotic episode. He attacked his own knights, killing several before being subdued. After that, his sanity would flicker in and out like a candle in the wind. Sometimes he believed he was made of glass. He refused to be touched, terrified he'd shatter. His courtiers, in their infinite medieval wisdom, tried to treat this by strapping him down, shaving his head, and dousing him in holy water. Naturally, it didn't help. For decades, France endured a monarchy ruled by ghosts, a mad king, a scheming queen, and nobles tearing the country apart. It all began with a bright, sensitive boy who grew up too fast, too alone, and under too much pressure. Margaret of Anjou, a childhood trained for chaos. Now let's drift quietly to the 15th century. A little girl named Margaret of Anjou was born into a French noble house. By 14, she was married to England's Henry VI, another gentle soul cursed with instability. Margaret had been raised to be politically sharp, fluent in multiple languages, trained in diplomacy, and fully aware that her future depended on being useful. When she arrived in England, she found herself surrounded by suspicion and xenophobia. She was French. Educated. Confident. The court hated her on sight. Henry soon succumbed to mental illness, long periods of catatonia and confusion. So Margaret ruled in his place. It didn't end well. The Wars of the Roses erupted, plunging England into decades of chaos. But it's worth remembering that beneath the political legend was a woman who had never been allowed to be a child, trained from birth to survive a system designed to use her. The sickly sons of the Habsburgs. Let's drift back to Austria, where the Habsburgs, still at it, continued their tradition of breeding weakness into their children along with titles. By the 16th century, their children were famously frail. Chronic illnesses, malformed jaws, and a general air of constitutional exhaustion were common. Court physicians were baffled. Herbal tonics, leeches, and mercury were all administered, none of which improved the situation. The irony is almost tragicomic. They spent centuries arranging marriages to strengthen alliances, and in doing so, weakened their own bloodline beyond repair. By the time Charles II of Spain arrived, the final, faltering branch, the dynasty had become a living case study in genetic collapse. His childhood was a series of medical crises, failed lessons, and exorcisms. When he died, childless, Europe collectively sighed in relief and then immediately went to war over his will. Isabella of Castile, a childhood in fear and fire. Let's pause in Castile, 15th century Spain. Isabella, the future unifier of Spain and patron of Columbus, didn't start with luxury. Her father died when she was 3. Her mother fell into depression. She grew up in political exile, constantly moved from castle to castle, living off uncertain funds. Isabella's early letters show a girl raised in insecurity, obsessed with prayer, wary of flattery, distrustful of everyone. That cautious, devout child grew into one of the most formidable rulers of her age, but one whose faith justified acts of cruelty, from the Inquisition to the expulsion of the Jews. Her strength was forged in fear. A royal childhood built not on indulgence, but survival. Mary, Queen of Scots, a tragic upbringing in velvet. Mary Stuart's life reads like a Gothic lullaby. Crowned Queen of Scotland when she was 6 days old, sent to France at 5 for safety, and married into the French royal family at 15. Her childhood was one long diplomatic maneuver. In France, she was doted on, educated, admired, painted in silk and pearls. But she belonged to no one. Every hug, every lesson, every smile was political. When her husband, Francis II, died young, Mary returned to Scotland, a widow at 18. The rest of her life unraveled in betrayals, plots, and imprisonment, ending with her execution at 44. And somewhere in that story is the small, frightened child who never chose any of it. The weight of small crowns. It's easy to imagine medieval royals as spoiled, surrounded by luxury, pampered from birth. But most of them were hostages of circumstance. Their childhoods were laboratories for power. Every friendship tested. Every affection politicized. Every decision made for them. They grew up in gilded cages, under constant scrutiny. Their tutors measured their handwriting as if it foretold the kingdom's fate. Their nurses whispered prayers over them, terrified of their own mistakes. And their parents, when they were around at all, saw them less as children and more as symbols. No wonder so many grew into paranoid, superstitious adults who trusted no one and ruled by fear. They were never taught how not to. Drifting out of the nursery. So, what do we learn from these small, strange childhoods? That even in the highest towers, loneliness can echo louder than power. That a crown, placed too early, weighs heavier than stone. And that behind every portrait of a royal smiling serenely from a gilded frame, there's probably a child who just wanted to play, and couldn't. History remembers them for their crowns, wars, and signatures. But maybe, just maybe, they deserve to be remembered for their quiet moments too, the shivering, sleepless nights before coronations, the whispered prayers, the sound of their own breath in a vast, cold room. Soft outro, strings and fading candle hiss. If you're still awake, you've just survived 1,000 years of royal insomnia. If you're asleep, good. You're somewhere safer than they ever were. Sleep softly, dream quietly. And I'll see you next time, when we drift into another corner of forgotten history. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're drifting back through time, far back, to a world of marble, myth, and a lot of very confused architects trying to defy gravity. So, settle in, dim the lights, get comfortable. Maybe pour some tea. And as you close your eyes, we'll wander through the ghostly remains of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Because, of course, we built them, and then promptly lost almost all of them. Subscribe if you enjoy slow history, it helps the channel, and it keeps these sleepy expeditions alive. Now, let's start our quiet journey, one wonder at a time. 1. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the last survivor. Let's begin where we still can. The only ancient wonder you can still technically visit without needing an archaeology degree or a time machine. The Great Pyramid of Giza. It stands on the edge of the Egyptian desert, older than writing in most places, and frankly, older than most of our common sense. Built around 2560 BCE for Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, depending on which historian you ask and how tired they are. Now, Khufu wasn't exactly modest. He decided his eternal resting place needed to be the size of a small mountain. And for reasons no one can fully agree on, an entire workforce, somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 laborers, spent decades cutting, hauling, and stacking over 2 million limestone blocks. Each one heavier than your car. Because, of course, the afterlife required a very impressive real estate portfolio. The funny thing? The ancient Greeks thought the pyramid was already absurdly old in their time. When Herodotus, the ancient world's nosiest travel blogger, visited, the pyramid was already over 2,000 years old. He wrote down every rumor he heard about it, including one that said it was built by slaves forced to haul stones for 20 years. Modern archaeologists, bless them, disagree. Evidence suggests skilled workers, not slaves, built it, likely paid with food, beer, and what must have been an alarming number of onions. Even now, the pyramid stands almost perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. No one is quite sure how they managed that without lasers or Google Maps. It's as if ancient Egypt looked at the stars and said, yes, that's the grid system now. And yet, for all its grandeur, it's strangely silent. The Great Pyramid no longer holds its treasures, looters handled that centuries ago. Khufu's mummy? Gone. The gold? Gone. All that remains is a narrow stone tunnel leading to empty chambers and the sound of tourists wheezing up the steps. Still, it's the only one left standing, the last survivor of a list that time erased. A monument not just to Khufu, but to our species' unshakable need to build things that last far longer than we do. 2. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the wonder that might never have existed. Next, we drift east to Babylon. Or at least, to the idea of Babylon, because this wonder might be the most poetic case of we may have made the whole thing up. The Hanging Gardens were said to be a series of lush, terraced gardens rising high above the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. A man-made paradise. Palm trees, flowers, vines, cascading down like a green waterfall from heaven. Water lifted from the Euphrates River by mysterious ancient machinery. The legend goes that King Nebuchadnezzar II built them around 600 BCE to comfort his homesick wife, Amytis of Media, who missed the mountains of her homeland. Because apparently, when your spouse is sad, you build a mountain out of plants instead of just talking about it. But here's the twist. We have no Babylonian record of them. No inscriptions, no blueprints, no mentions from the locals. It's as if the Babylonians collectively forgot to brag about their biggest tourist attraction. Instead, every account comes from Greek historians who, frankly, weren't always known for their fact-checking. Some archaeologists think the gardens were real, just not in Babylon. They point to Nineveh, hundreds of miles away, where the Assyrian king Sennacherib once built elaborate palace gardens with complex irrigation systems. Clay tablets there describe a wonder for all peoples. Which, you have to admit, sounds suspiciously like marketing language for a seven-wonder contender. So perhaps the Hanging Gardens existed. Just, in the wrong city. Or maybe, they were a metaphor that blossomed into myth, a story too beautiful not to believe. Because whether or not they stood, the image of them, greenery rising out of the desert, still lingers. Proof that sometimes the most enduring architecture lives in imagination, not stone. Point 7. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're drifting back to a different kind of empire. Not one of conquest, or cathedrals, or golden crowns, but one of painted screens, silk sleeves, and quiet, flickering lanterns. Welcome to Edo, Japan. It's the early 1600s. The samurai rule the land, the shogun keeps his court in tight order, and peace, an almost unnatural peace, stretches across the islands. After centuries of war, the swords have gone still. And into that stillness, something blooms. An entire culture built on beauty, pleasure, and performance. So, settle in. Dim the lights. And as the world outside quiets, we'll wander softly through the floating world, the ukiyo, where art, illusion, and desire are all blurred together beneath the soft paper glow of a lantern. And if you enjoy these calm dives into history's stranger corners, don't forget to subscribe or follow. It keeps this little nighttime journey alive, and it helps the algorithms know you like falling asleep to gossip about 17th century Japan. 1. The floating world. The Japanese called it ukiyo, literally, the floating world. A term that once meant the sorrowful world of impermanence in Buddhist philosophy. But during the Edo period, people rewrote its meaning, turning melancholy into hedonism. Now, ukiyo meant the fleeting world of pleasure. Of tea houses, theater, and courtesans, all suspended between candlelight and illusion. It was a world built to forget time. A place where merchants, technically the lowest class in the rigid Tokugawa hierarchy, could briefly play the part of nobles. Where poets, painters, and actors mingled with the wealthy in a haze of perfume, sake, and whispered haiku. The most famous district of this dreamlike underworld was Yoshiwara. The shogun had established it in 1617, officially as a licensed quarter. Which is a delicate way of saying, a legally approved zone for everything polite society pretended not to enjoy. It was surrounded by a moat, entered through guarded gates, and laid out in perfect order, as if the city's temptations had been given their own postal address. By day, Yoshiwara looked almost serene. Straight roads, wooden facades, cherry trees that turned the air pink each spring. But at night, it transformed. Paper lanterns shimmered in every window. The air filled with the slow pluck of shamisen strings and the rustle of silk on tatami. And somewhere behind the sliding doors, poets composed verses about lips like autumn leaves and the sound of rain on parasols. 2. The courtesans, living works of art. Now, when we talk about Yoshiwara, we inevitably talk about its women, the oiran, or courtesans. But these weren't ordinary women of the night. An Oiran was closer to a performance artist, a celebrity, a fashion icon, and a walking poem all at once. Training began young. Girls studied calligraphy, poetry, music, and conversation. They learned how to pour tea in perfect rhythm, how to paint delicate fans, how to laugh just softly enough to seem unbothered by anything as mundane as mortality. Their job was not simply to entertain, it was to embody the very ideal of refinement. The highest-ranking courtesans were called tayu. To see one in public was an event, a slow-moving spectacle. She would glide down the main street in impossibly tall wooden clogs, her robes layered in silks that cost more than a farmer's lifetime of rice. Her hair sculpted like an architectural marvel, pinned with gold and tortoiseshell. An entire entourage followed, clearing the way, as if a living goddess had stepped briefly into the mortal world, and would soon retreat again. A tayu could reject suitors as easily as she could charm them. And many did. To be chosen by her was a mark of status, and usually, a financial catastrophe. Men sold property, businesses, and in some cases, family heirlooms just for a single evening. Because of course they did. Yoshiwara was, in many ways, the original subscription-based fantasy economy. 3. The art of the pleasure houses. Inside the tea houses and salons, the aesthetic of pleasure was as important as the act itself. Walls were painted with golden cranes, fans lay open like petals, and every movement was designed to appear effortless. But nothing about Yoshiwara was effortless. Everything was ritualized, even the way the courtesans spoke. They used refined, archaic forms of Japanese speech, full of metaphor and teasing distance. To listen to them was to be wrapped in a spell woven from manners and mystery. The goal wasn't passion, it was performance. To create an illusion so elegant that reality itself seemed gauche by comparison. It was less about desire, and more about beauty elevated to a philosophy. Ephemeral, expensive, and utterly untouchable. That idea, that beauty was meant to be fleeting, became the heart of Edo culture. And it spread far beyond Yoshiwara. Woodblock printers captured the courtesans' faces and kimonos in vivid color, creating the now iconic ukiyo-e prints, literally, pictures of the floating world. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro made them famous, depicting women with serene expressions and impossibly long necks. Each print was both advertisement and art, a souvenir from a dream. Even centuries later, these images would inspire European artists, Van Gogh, Monet, Toulouse-Lautrec, who studied their flat color planes and perfect lines, never quite realizing that behind those tranquil faces lay an empire of exhaustion and control. 4. The illusion of freedom. For all their fame, the courtesans of Yoshiwara lived within strict boundaries. They could not leave the district without permission. Debts bound them to their houses, debts so vast that freedom became almost mythical. A tayu might command immense respect, but she was still a performer inside an invisible cage. That contrast, elegance within confinement, fascinated Edo society. It became a metaphor for the floating world itself. Pleasure was permitted, even celebrated, so long as it stayed contained. Outside Yoshiwara's moat, life went on with the same rigid discipline the shogunate demanded. Inside, the world floated, beautiful, temporary, and utterly unreal. Many of the courtesans wrote poetry about their own lives, though most of it never left the district. One fragment survives, attributed to a woman known only as Kasegawa. The lantern burns low. The moon hides behind the eaves. Tomorrow, another face. It's hard not to hear the melancholy beneath the silk. Hey everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to a different kind of empire. Not one of conquest, or cathedrals, or golden crowns, but one of painted screens, silk sleeves, and quiet, flickering lanterns. Welcome to Edo, Japan. It's the early 1600s. The samurai rule the land, the shogun keeps his court in tight order, and peace, an almost unnatural peace, stretches across the islands. After centuries of war, the swords have gone still. And into that stillness, something blooms. An entire culture built on beauty, pleasure, and performance. So, settle in. Dim the lights. And as the world outside quiets, we'll wander softly through the floating world, the ukiyo, where art, illusion, and desire are all blurred together beneath the soft paper glow of a lantern. And if you enjoy these calm dives into history's stranger corners, don't forget to subscribe or follow. It keeps this little nighttime journey alive, and it helps the algorithms know you like falling asleep to gossip about 17th century Japan. 1. The floating world. The Japanese called it ukiyo, literally, the floating world. A term that once meant the sorrowful world of impermanence in Buddhist philosophy. But during the Edo period, people rewrote its meaning, turning melancholy into hedonism. Now, ukiyo meant the fleeting world of pleasure. Of tea houses, theater, and courtesans, all suspended between candlelight and illusion. It was a world built to forget time. A place where merchants, technically the lowest class in the rigid Tokugawa hierarchy, could briefly play the part of nobles. Where poets, painters, and actors mingled with the wealthy in a haze of perfume, sake, and whispered haiku. The most famous district of this dreamlike underworld was Yoshiwara. The shogun had established it in 1617, officially as a licensed quarter. Which is a delicate way of saying, a legally approved zone for everything polite society pretended not to enjoy. It was surrounded by a moat, entered through guarded gates, and laid out in perfect order, as if the city's temptations had been given their own postal address. By day, Yoshiwara looked almost serene. Straight roads, wooden facades, cherry trees that turned the air pink each spring. But at night, it transformed. Paper lanterns shimmered in every window. The air filled with the slow pluck of shamisen strings and the rustle of silk on tatami. And somewhere behind the sliding doors, poets composed verses about lips like autumn leaves and the sound of rain on parasols. 2. The courtesans, living works of art. Now, when we talk about Yoshiwara, we inevitably talk about its women, the oiran, or courtesans. But these weren't ordinary women of the night. An oiran was closer to a performance artist, a celebrity, a fashion icon, and a walking poem all at once. Training began young. Girls studied calligraphy, poetry, music, and conversation. They learned how to pour tea in perfect rhythm, how to paint delicate fans, how to laugh just softly enough to seem unbothered by anything as mundane as mortality. Their job was not simply to entertain, it was to embody the very ideal of refinement. The highest-ranking courtesans were called tayu. To see one in public was an event, a slow-moving spectacle. She would glide down the main street in impossibly tall wooden clogs, her robes layered in silks that cost more than a farmer's lifetime of rice. Her hair sculpted like an architectural marvel, pinned with gold and tortoiseshell. An entire entourage followed, clearing the way, as if a living goddess had stepped briefly into the mortal world, and would soon retreat again. A tayu could reject suitors as easily as she could charm them. And many did. To be chosen by her was a mark of status, and usually, a financial catastrophe. Men sold property, businesses, and in some cases, family heirlooms just for a single evening. Because of course they did. Yoshiwara was, in many ways, the original subscription-based fantasy economy. 3. The art of the pleasure houses. Inside the tea houses and salons, the aesthetic of pleasure was as important as the act itself. Walls were painted with golden cranes, fans lay open like petals, and every movement was designed to appear effortless. But nothing about Yoshiwara was effortless. Everything was ritualized, even the way the courtesans spoke. They used refined, archaic forms of Japanese speech, full of metaphor and teasing distance. To listen to them was to be wrapped in a spell woven from manners and mystery. The goal wasn't passion, it was performance. To create an illusion so elegant that reality itself seemed gauche by comparison. It was less about desire, and more about beauty elevated to a philosophy. Ephemeral, expensive, and utterly untouchable. That idea, that beauty was meant to be fleeting, became the heart of Edo culture. And it spread far beyond Yoshiwara. Woodblock printers captured the courtesans' faces and kimonos in vivid color, creating the now iconic ukiyo-e prints, literally, pictures of the floating world. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro made them famous, depicting women with serene expressions and impossibly long necks. Each print was both advertisement and art, a souvenir from a dream. Even centuries later, these images would inspire European artists, Van Gogh, Monet, Toulouse-Lautrec, who studied their flat color planes and perfect lines, never quite realizing that behind those tranquil faces lay an empire of exhaustion and control. 4. The illusion of freedom. For all their fame, the courtesans of Yoshiwara lived within strict boundaries. They could not leave the district without permission. Debts bound them to their houses, debts so vast that freedom became almost mythical. A Taiyo might command immense respect, but she was still a performer inside an invisible cage. That contrast, elegance within confinement, fascinated Edo society. It became a metaphor for the floating world itself. Pleasure was permitted, even celebrated, so long as it stayed contained. Outside Yoshiwara's moat, life went on with the same rigid discipline the shogunate demanded. Inside, the world floated, beautiful, temporary, and utterly unreal. Many of the courtesans wrote poetry about their own lives, though most of it never left the district. One fragment survives, attributed to a woman known only as Kasegawa. The lantern burns low. The moon hides behind the eaves. Tomorrow, another face. It's hard not to hear the melancholy beneath the silk. So, we've wandered through the lantern-lit streets of Yoshiwara, that delicate maze of laughter, silk, and make-believe. Now, let's drift behind the painted screens. To the artists who turned that world into something immortal. Because while the courtesans lived in a loop of illusion, someone was always watching, sketching, carving, printing. And from those quiet studios came the images that defined an entire era. 1. The woodblock masters. Woodblock printing, or ukiyo-e, became the visual language of the floating world. It started small, postcards, advertisements, theater flyers. But as the century went on, it blossomed into high art. The process was intricate. One artist would design the picture. Another carved it, painstakingly, into wooden blocks, one for each color. And a third would print the sheets by hand, layer upon layer, until the image seemed to glow. The subjects were everything the shogunate frowned upon: courtesans, kabuki actors, sumo wrestlers, and lovers in silken shadows. If it was beautiful, forbidden, or fleeting, someone carved it into a block of cherrywood. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro became celebrities in their own right. He specialized in bijinjie, pictures of beautiful women. His courtesans looked serene, but always slightly distant, eyes half closed, lost in private thought. You could almost hear the rustle of their kimonos, the whisper of their sighs. Utamaro's work was so evocative that it scandalized the authorities. In 1804, he was briefly imprisoned for depicting historical figures too sensually, because apparently, the government felt that if you drew a general's wife looking too relaxed, society might collapse. He didn't stay in jail long. But the message was clear: beauty was to be admired quietly, not celebrated too boldly. 2. The secret prince, shunga. Of course, that didn't stop anyone. Hidden among the elegant portraits and polite landscapes were the shunga, erotic prints. Explicit, yes, but more than that, intimate. They weren't vulgar so much as dreamlike. Couples in elaborate robes, entangled in impossible geometry. Bodies depicted not with lust, but with an odd tenderness. Sometimes the lovers were humans. Sometimes gods. Sometimes, and we'll say this gently, things that looked suspiciously not human at all. Everyone owned them. Samurai, merchants, even monks. There's a record of shunga being given as wedding gifts, a sort of illustrated advice book that was both art and education. The famous Hokusai, yes, the man who painted the Great Wave, made some of the most famous shunga of all. His piece The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife is infamous now, but in its time it was just another page in a long cultural tradition of erotic fantasy and folklore. To Edo sensibilities, it wasn't shocking. It was part of life, the idea that desire, like art, should flow freely. Naturally, that made the authorities deeply uncomfortable. The Tokugawa regime issued wave after wave of censorship laws, banning depictions of prostitutes, lovers, or political figures. Which, of course, only made artists more creative. Instead of showing what was banned, they implied it. A half-closed fan, a dropped hairpin, a distant moon. Desire hidden behind metaphor, the art of suggestion turned into rebellion. 3. The theater of shadows. While the courtesans ruled Yoshiwara, another set of stars performed just outside it, the kabuki actors. Kabuki began, fittingly enough, with a woman. In the early 1600s, a performer named Okuni staged dances on the riverbanks of Kyoto, parodying priests, nobles, and warriors with wicked humor. Audiences loved it. The shogunate, predictably, did not. So, in true bureaucratic fashion, they banned female performers entirely. Men took over the roles, dressing as women, and the all-male kabuki theater was born. It became the perfect companion to the floating world, exaggerated, beautiful, and full of secrets. The actors were adored. Their faces appeared in prints, their lines quoted like poetry. But offstage, many lived the same double lives as the courtesans, adored in fantasy, restricted in reality. One famous actor, Ichikawa Denjuro-ai, became so popular that he was stabbed on stage by a jealous rival. The crowd reportedly kept watching, assuming it was part of the play. Because, of course they did. The show must go on, even when it really shouldn't. Kabuki, like Yoshiwara, offered escape from a world that prized obedience above all. For a few hours, the audience could live in color and movement instead of silence and rules. And then they went home, quietly, back to curfews and social rank. 4. The fall of Yoshiwara. Nothing floats forever. Even the floating world. By the late 1800s, the world outside Japan began to intrude. The shogunate weakened. Foreign ships appeared on the horizon, demanding trade, diplomacy, and change. And the new Meiji government, in its rush to modernize, decided that Yoshiwara, with all its silk and illusion, belonged to an older Japan. The courtesans lost their mystique. Western fashions and technologies swept in. The careful rituals of the pleasure quarters began to seem old-fashioned, even quaint. The woodblock prints stopped featuring oiron and actors, and started depicting steam trains, telegraphs, and city skylines. The dream had shifted. The floating world sank, slowly, quietly, under the weight of progress. Yoshiwara itself burned several times over the centuries, once in the Great Fire of 1913, and again in the bombings of World War II. Each time, it rebuilt, but never quite the same. Today, the name survives, but the magic is gone, replaced by neon, noise, and convenience stores. 5. The ghost of the floating world. And yet, it lingers. In the folds of a kimono print. In the still lines of a hokusai wave. In the quiet allure of a face half turned away. The floating world was never meant to last. It existed precisely because it was temporary. A defiance of time itself, beauty blooming for a night, then fading with the dawn. Centuries later, those images still drift across museum walls, serene and self-contained. The courtesan's smiles haven't changed. The paper still glows faintly, like lantern light through fog. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting. Because while their world vanished, their illusion didn't. It floats still, in art, in memory, and in every quiet moment when beauty feels just out of reach. Soft closing music swells, a single shamisen chord fading into silence. So if you're still awake, well done. You've wandered through the dreamlands of Edo, where art and desire dance together under lantern light, knowing the whole time it couldn't last. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to drift through another forgotten corner of history next time, make sure you're subscribed, tucked in, and ready to dream of a world that's gone, but not quite lost. Good night. So, we've wandered through the lantern-lit streets of Yoshiwara, that delicate maze of laughter, silk, and make-believe. Now, let's drift behind the painted screens. To the artists who turned that world into something immortal. Because while the courtesans lived in a loop of illusion, someone was always watching, sketching, carving, printing. And from those quiet studios came the images that defined an entire era. 1. The woodblock masters. Woodblock printing, or ukiyo-e, became the visual language of the floating world. It started small: postcards, advertisements, theater flyers. But as the century went on, it blossomed into high art. The process was intricate. One artist would design the picture. Another carved it, painstakingly, into wooden blocks, one for each color. And a third would print the sheets by hand, layer upon layer, until the image seemed to glow. The subjects were everything the shogunate frowned upon: courtesans, kabuki actors, sumo wrestlers, and lovers in silken shadows. If it was beautiful, forbidden, or fleeting, someone carved it into a block of cherrywood. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro became celebrities in their own right. He specialized in bijinjie, pictures of beautiful women. His courtesans looked serene, but always slightly distant, eyes half closed, lost in private thought. You could almost hear the rustle of their kimonos, the whisper of their sighs. Utamaro's work was so evocative that it scandalized the authorities. In 1804, he was briefly imprisoned for depicting historical figures too sensually, because apparently, the government felt that if you drew a general's wife looking too relaxed, society might collapse. He didn't stay in jail long. But the message was clear: beauty was to be admired quietly, not celebrated too boldly. 2. The secret prince, shunga. Of course, that didn't stop anyone. Hidden among the elegant portraits and polite landscapes were the shunga, erotic prints. Explicit, yes, but more than that, intimate. They weren't vulgar so much as dreamlike. Couples in elaborate robes, entangled in impossible geometry. Bodies depicted not with lust, but with an odd tenderness. Sometimes the lovers were humans. Sometimes gods. Sometimes, and we'll say this gently, things that looked suspiciously not human at all. Everyone owned them. Samurai, merchants, even monks. There's a record of shunga being given as wedding gifts, a sort of illustrated advice book that was both art and education. The famous Hokusai, yes, the man who painted the Great Wave, made some of the most famous shunga of all. His piece The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife is infamous now, but in its time it was just another page in a long cultural tradition of erotic fantasy and folklore. To Edo sensibilities, it wasn't shocking. It was part of life, the idea that desire, like art, should flow freely. Naturally, that made the authorities deeply uncomfortable. The Tokugawa regime issued wave after wave of censorship laws, banning depictions of prostitutes, lovers, or political figures. Which, of course, only made artists more creative. Instead of showing what was banned, they implied it. A half-closed fan, a dropped hairpin, a distant moon. Desire hidden behind metaphor, the art of suggestion turned into rebellion. 3. The theater of shadows. While the courtesans ruled Yoshiwara, another set of stars performed just outside it, the kabuki actors. Kabuki began, fittingly enough, with a woman. In the early 1600s, a performer named Okuni staged dances on the riverbanks of Kyoto, parodying priests, nobles, and warriors with wicked humor. Audiences loved it. The shogunate, predictably, did not. So, in true bureaucratic fashion, they banned female performers entirely. Men took over the roles, dressing as women, and the all-male kabuki theater was born. It became the perfect companion to the floating world, exaggerated, beautiful, and full of secrets. The actors were adored. Their faces appeared in prints, their lines quoted like poetry. But offstage, many lived the same double lives as the courtesans, adored in fantasy, restricted in reality. One famous actor, Ichikawa Denjuro, became so popular that he was stabbed on stage by a jealous rival. The crowd reportedly kept watching, assuming it was part of the play. Because, of course they did. The show must go on, even when it really shouldn't. Kabuki, like Yoshiwara, offered escape from a world that prized obedience above all. For a few hours, the audience could live in color and movement instead of silence and rules. And then they went home, quietly, back to curfews and social rank. 4. The fall of Yoshiwara. nothing floats forever. Even the floating world. By the late 1800s, the world outside Japan began to intrude. The shogunate weakened. Foreign ships appeared on the horizon, demanding trade, diplomacy, and change. And the new Meiji government, in its rush to modernize, decided that Yoshiwara, with all its silk and illusion, belonged to an older Japan. The courtesans lost their mystique. Western fashions and technologies swept in. The careful rituals of the pleasure quarters began to seem old-fashioned, even quaint. The woodblock prints stopped featuring oiron and actors, and started depicting steam trains, telegraphs, and city skylines. The dream had shifted. The floating world sank, slowly, quietly, under the weight of progress. Yoshiwara itself burned several times over the centuries, once in the Great Fire of 1913, and again in the bombings of World War II. Each time, it rebuilt, but never quite the same. Today, the name survives, but the magic is gone, replaced by neon, noise, and convenience stores. 5. The ghost of the floating world. And yet, it lingers. In the folds of a kimono print. In the still lines of a hokusai wave. In the quiet allure of a face half turned away. The floating world was never meant to last. It existed precisely because it was temporary. A defiance of time itself, beauty blooming for a night, then fading with the dawn. Centuries later, those images still drift across museum walls, serene and self-contained. The courtesan's smiles haven't changed. The paper still glows faintly, like lantern light through fog. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting. Because while their world vanished, their illusion didn't. It floats still, in art, in memory, and in every quiet moment when beauty feels just out of reach. Soft closing music swells, a single shamisen chord fading into silence. So if you're still awake, well done. You've wandered through the dreamlands of Edo, where art and desire dance together under lantern light, knowing the whole time it couldn't last. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to drift through another forgotten corner of history next time, make sure you're subscribed, tucked in, and ready to dream of a world that's gone, but not quite lost. Good night. 1111. Hey again. If you're still with me, awake, half awake, or pleasantly somewhere in between, we've reached the quiet part of our journey. The part where history becomes less about what happened, and more about what lingers. We've wandered the streets of Yoshiwara, seen the courtesans and the artists, and watched the world they built dissolve into memory. Now, let's drift through what that all meant. Because the floating world wasn't just a district, or a style, it was a philosophy. A way of looking at life, knowing that everything, love, fame, youth, even lantern light, would eventually fade. And instead of fighting that truth, Edo Japan made peace with it. Or rather, turned it into art. 1. Mono no aware, the beauty of sadness. There's a Japanese phrase, mono no aware. It's hard to translate directly, but it means something like the gentle sadness of things. The awareness that beauty is bound to fade, and that its impermanence makes it all the more beautiful. Cherry blossoms are the perfect example. They bloom for only a week or two each spring. People gather beneath them, drink sake, laugh, and watch the petals fall. Everyone knows the moment won't last. That's the point. Yoshiwara was, in its own way, a living embodiment of that idea. The courtesans, the lights, the painted screens, all created to be beautiful because they were temporary. Even their loves were fleeting by design. A night, a season, a year, then gone. The floating world wasn't about escaping impermanence. It was about accepting it, with grace, and maybe a touch of eyeliner. And that's strangely comforting. In a world obsessed with permanence, buildings, records, legacies, the people of Edo seem to whisper, "It's okay that it fades." That's what makes it real. 2. Beauty as performance. We often think of beauty as something fixed, something you can possess. But in Edo, it was more like a performance. Something you create, over and over, knowing it will vanish when the lights go out. A courtesan's hair might take hours to sculpt, and be undone within moments. A calligrapher would paint a poem with perfect grace, then throw the paper away. An actor might spend decades mastering a single gesture, one movement, seen and gone forever. That might sound exhausting to us. But for them, it was a kind of enlightenment. To live entirely in the moment, to give beauty its due, and then to let it drift off like incense smoke. Even their word for entertainment, asobi, carries a sense of play. Pleasure wasn't sin, it was art. And in Yoshiwara, every glance, every laugh, every painted lip was part of that performance. Of course, there was darkness beneath it, exhaustion, debt, and control. But that, too, became part of the illusion, perfection hiding decay. A culture that understood how fragile life was, and decided to make it beautiful anyway. 3. The floating world and the modern one. You can still see traces of it today. In Japan's fashion districts, in minimalist architecture, in the quiet aesthetic of imperfection, wabi-sabi. It's the same soul that looked at cracked pottery and said, "Let's fill the breaks with gold." Even outside Japan, the spirit of the floating world drifts on. The Impressionists borrowed its composition. Film directors borrow its silence. Instagram borrows, well, everything but the restraint. We still chase that illusion, the perfect moment, perfectly lit. A dinner, a kiss, a sunrise, something to freeze and share before it fades. But the irony is that the act of trying to preserve it usually makes it disappear faster. The people of Edo might have found that funny. They didn't photograph their moments, they lived them, then let them go. A little wiser. A little emptier. But content. 4. The shogun, the merchant, and the dream. There's a quiet irony in how the floating world began. It was born out of control, a pleasure district created to contain human desire. The shogunate thought they could manage temptation the way they managed taxes, with walls and rules. But instead of suppressing it, they created an empire of imagination. The merchants they tried to keep in their place became the patrons of art, literature, and style. The courtesans, supposedly powerless, became cultural icons. And the artists, anonymous craftsmen, carving in dim rooms, ended up defining Japan's visual identity for centuries. It's almost poetic. The government built Yoshiwara to confine pleasure. Instead, it became a world that taught everyone how to see beauty differently. Because that's what happens when you try to cage desire, it paints the walls. 5. The final lantern. Picture it one last time. The streets are quiet now. The lanterns are flickering low. The courtesans are asleep, the shamisen strings have gone still, and the scent of incense fades into morning air. The floating world is gone, but its shadow drifts gently through time. You can see it in a brushstroke. In the soft glow of a paper lamp. In the way a story like this still hums with something both wistful and strangely peaceful. Because, in the end, that's all the floating world ever was. A collective dream we once believed in, painted so vividly that it outlived its dreamers. Soft music fades to near silence, the faint rustle of wind through bamboo. So, if your eyes are heavy, that's all right. You've drifted through a world that was never meant to be permanent. A place that taught us, centuries ago, that every light must dim, and that there's beauty in the dimming. Thank you for joining me tonight, in this quiet corner of history. If you'd like to wander again, into forgotten palaces, impossible marriages, or royal disasters that aged poorly, you know where to find me. Until then, sleep well. And remember, everything fades, and that's what makes it shine. So, now that we've settled into the court, let's look at who really owned the game. Because, like most things in history that involved ceremony, danger, and public attention, it wasn't just a pastime for the people. It was theater for the powerful. Paktapak was, above all, a royal performance. A place where kings could pretend to be gods, and occasionally, where gods were treated like kings. 1. When a game was a throne room. Imagine a Maya city. Not a village of grass huts, but a sprawling urban landscape, pyramids rising from the jungle, painted red and blue. Palaces with plaster walls gleaming in the sun. The air thick with incense and humidity. And right in the middle of it all, the ball court. It wasn't just next to the palace. It was part of it. A physical extension of the ruler's power, carved with his likeness, his victories, and his lineage. Every time the ball bounced across the stone, it was said to echo through the underworld and back again. And every king wanted that echo to sound like his name. Rulers would sponsor elaborate matches to mark coronations, victories, or sacred calendar days. Sometimes, they even stepped onto the court themselves, or at least pretended to. We don't know exactly how many royal backsides ever actually touched the ball, but in the art, they love to show it. Courageous. Heroic. Beautifully costumed. A god in motion, probably followed by a professional doing the actual hard part. Still, for the spectators, it worked. To see their divine ruler reenact the cosmic game was to see order itself restored. A ball thudding against stone could be the sound of creation renewed. That's the kind of PR money can't buy, though it helps to control the priesthood. 2. The blood beneath the ceremony. The Maya saw blood as sacred, the essence of life, the food of the gods. So when we talk about playing for the gods, it wasn't just poetic. It was literal. Rulers would sometimes offer their own blood before or after the game. They did it through ritual piercing, ears, tongues, sometimes other, less comfortable places. Using stingray spines or obsidian blades. The blood would fall onto strips of paper, which were then burned, sending the offering heavenward in smoke. In their minds, that wasn't gruesome. It was necessary. Like paying rent to the cosmos. And if the match ended with a sacrifice of a captured enemy, or perhaps an unlucky player, that, too, was seen as balance restored. A reminder that even royalty owed their existence to divine cycles. It sounds shocking to us now. But to them, it was harmony. A heartbeat offered to keep the universe breathing. 3. The sacred geometry of power. If you stood in a Maya ball court, you'd notice something strange. The proportions. They weren't random. Many were built with exact astronomical alignments, to the solstice sunrise, to Venus rising, to the cardinal directions. The court itself was a map of the cosmos. The center represented the earthly plane. The sloping walls mirrored the edges of the world. And the narrow passage between them symbolized the liminal space, the path between life and death. When the ball flew, it wasn't just an object in play. It was the sun itself, traveling between light and shadow. The players weren't sweating men. They were celestial bodies. And somewhere, up on the temple steps, the king, decked in feathers and jade, was the axis around which it all turned. A reminder that the divine order depended, conveniently, on him remaining in charge. Of course, it always does. 4. Power, pride, and propaganda. Inscriptions from cities like Copan, Palenque, and Tikal tell us how seriously this was taken. Rulers bragged about their ball court victories the way modern leaders brag about, well, just about anything. Wars, reforms, infrastructure, and yes, sports. For example, King Smokemix of Copan had his court rebuilt to outshine his rivals. It wasn't enough to rule, you had to have the most beautiful venue for cosmic recreation. Each carving told a story. Here is the king, standing over the ball. Here is the severed head of his defeated rival. Here, the maze god blesses him with renewal. Its myth is marketing, divine endorsement carved in limestone. The ancient equivalent of sponsored by the gods. And the people believed it. They wanted to believe it. Because in a world ruled by cycles of drought and rain, life and decay, it was comforting to think someone was in control, someone who could keep the ball of the sun in motion. Even if that someone was just another mortal in feathers, pretending not to sweat. 5. The king's double game. There's a subtle irony in all this. The Maya ruler was expected to be the link between worlds. To embody both divine order and human frailty. That's a heavy role to play, especially when the myth you're reenacting ends in someone's decapitation. The carvings often show the moment of beheading with remarkable serenity. The sacrificed figure kneels calmly. Blood becomes vines, flowers, or maze, the renewal of life. It's artfully detached, almost peaceful. As if to say, yes, death is inevitable. But look how well it photographs. And maybe that's the real secret of Toppled. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing that death itself could be graceful. That the end could feed the beginning. Kings knew that if they could convince people of that, they could rule forever. Or at least until the next dynasty with better propaganda came along. Soft background music, a deep drumbeat fading into wind. So, the ball court was not just a playground. It was a mirror, showing both the divine and the human in motion. A stage where kings performed eternity. And where every bounce of the ball whispered, the world is fragile, but still turning. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into that fragility, into the myths that shaped the game itself. And how two brothers from legend became the most important athletes in all of creation. For now, let's pause. Take a slow breath. And imagine those ancient stones glowing under a fading sunset. Silent now, but once echoing with the sound of life itself. Played between mortals and gods. Hey everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to a world of stone courts, shadowy gods, and a sport that was somehow both sacred ritual and ancient spectator entertainment. So, settle in. Dim the lights. And if you've had one of those days where the world feels a little too modern, you're in luck, because tonight, we're going very, very old school. If you enjoy these sleepy wanders through history, remember to subscribe before you drift off, because, let's be honest, you probably won't make it to the end. Now, close your eyes, if you'd like, and imagine the humid air of Mesoamerica. It's early morning. The sun is a soft gold mist over the trees. And somewhere, deep in a limestone valley, two teams of men are preparing to hurl a solid rubber ball at each other, using nothing but their hips. Because, of course they were. Part 1, the game that wasn't just a game. Toppled, or pits, as it was sometimes called, was the Maya ball game. But game is a generous word. To the Maya, this was part ceremony, part cosmic theater, part slightly deadly physical contest. Imagine a long stone court, open to the sky, its walls slanting upward on each side. Each wall is carved with elaborate reliefs, kings, gods, skulls, serpents, and maybe the occasional decapitated head. You know, just to keep morale high. At each end of the court, a heavy rubber ball, somewhere between the size of a grapefruit and a bowling ball, would be struck back and forth by the players. No hands. No feet. Only the hips, thighs, and chest. And sometimes, if you were feeling reckless, a well-timed shoulder. The goal, depending on the region and century, varied slightly. Sometimes it was to keep the ball in motion for as long as possible. Sometimes it was to pass it through a narrow stone ring set high on the wall, like a basketball hoop, but sideways, and designed by someone who hated you. It was brutal. The ball was solid rubber, weighing up to 9 pounds. A direct hit to the ribs could knock the wind out of you. A bad bounce to the jaw could be fatal. And yes, they did it all wearing nothing more than belts, loincloths, and decorative padding that looked great in stone carvings but didn't do much for actual protection. Still, this wasn't just a sport. It was theology in motion. Part 2, playing for the gods. To the Maya, every match of Toppled was a reenactment of creation itself. It wasn't about winning or losing, not entirely. It was about maintaining balance in the cosmos. The story came from their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, a beautiful, confusing, poetic epic that, among other things, tells of two divine twins, Hinpu and Zbalanque. They were ball players, of course. And when they started making too much noise playing the game on Earth, the gods of the underworld, called Zabalba, invited them down for a friendly match. You can probably guess how that went. The underworld, it turns out, was less a place for friendly competition and more a gauntlet of trials involving knives, jaguars, and decapitation. The first twin pair didn't do so well, one lost his head, literally. But the second set, the true hero twins, were clever. They outwitted the lords of Zabalba, resurrected their father's head, and, in the end, restored life and order to the world. So, when real-world Maya players stepped into the ball court, they weren't just athletes. They were participants in that myth, reenacting the battle between life and death, light and darkness, the sun and the underworld. It's kind of like the World Cup. If losing the World Cup could doom your entire civilization to cosmic collapse. Part 3, the spectacle and the stakes. Let's be clear, Pak-Tapak wasn't something everyone played for fun on the weekends. It wasn't pickup soccer. It was a ritual, and often, a royal one. Kings would sponsor the games. Priests would oversee them. Crowds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, would gather to watch. And though much of the exact rulebook is lost, we do know the games could last for hours, even days. Now, the part everyone asks about. Did the losers get sacrificed? Ah. The classic question. The answer is, maybe. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, no. And occasionally, possibly the winners were the ones sacrificed, depending on which city, which era, and how metaphorical everyone was feeling that week. The logic went like this. To be sacrificed after such a game was an honor, the ultimate offering to the gods. A guarantee of joining the divine, like retiring into the heavens after one too many concussions. But of course, being honored by decapitation is one of those cultural differences that historians politely call complex. Stone carvings from Chichen Itza show the moment clearly. One player kneels, his head neatly removed. From his neck, 7 streams of blood burst forth, each transforming into serpents, flowers, or ears of maize. It's both gruesome and oddly poetic, death feeding life. Or, if you prefer the practical interpretation, a strong warning against taking your eye off the ball. Part 4, the sound of the ball court. If you were there, in person, it must have been overwhelming. The ball slamming against stone. The crowd chanting, drums pounding, conch shells echoing. The hot, humid air thick with incense and sweat. The rubber ball would thud and roll and leap off the walls. Players would twist, pivot, and launch it with powerful hip thrusts, a phrase that, thankfully, didn't make it into most textbooks. Spectators shouted bets and prayers. Priests blew incense over the court, offering it to the gods. And high above, the king watched from a shaded platform, his head dressed taller than some of the players. Every sound, every movement was charged with symbolism. The court itself was an axis, the center of the universe. The walls represented the borders between life and death. The ball was the sun, moving between day and night. Each bounce, each strike, each echo was the world itself being reborn, again and again, until, eventually, the game ended and balance was restored. And that's, oddly soothing, isn't it? A reminder that even chaos can be ritualized, that even struggle has rhythm. Soft ambient music fades in, distant drums and slow flutes. So, as we drift deeper into this story, think of the Maya ball court not as a place of violence, but as a stage for something far more mysterious. The idea that the universe itself might depend on people remembering to play. In the next part, we'll wander into the royal courts and sacred temples that built these games, and explore how Pak-Tapak became a mirror of power, politics, and pride. But for now, just breathe. Let the sounds of the ancient jungle fill your imagination, and the slow, steady thump of that rubber ball echo softly in your mind. Because somewhere, in the ruins of a forgotten city, that sound still seems to bounce. Off stone walls, across centuries. Reminding us that even in the oldest games, the world was always watching. Let's drift back, now, not just centuries, but into myth. Before the first ball court was carved. Before kings wore jade crowns. Before history had a calendar to record it. In the beginning, there was a game. Or, at least, a very noisy one. 1. The first players. Long before humans built temples, there were 2 brothers, Hunapu and Spalank. They were the sons of a maiden and the ghost of a decapitated ballplayer. Because that's how most good creation stories start, with a touch of absurdity. Their father, Hunahpu I, and his brother had once been champions of the ballgame. Their skill was so great, their noise so constant, that they disturbed the gods of the underworld, the gloomy lords of Xibalba. Now, Xibalba wasn't a fire and brimstone kind of place. It was more of a bureaucratic nightmare with added scorpions. A kingdom of tricksters and trials, where the rulers, named things like Pus Master, Skull Master, and Bone Scepter, spent their afterlives thinking up new ways to inconvenience mortals. When the noise of the ballgame reached them, they were not amused. They summoned the brothers down for a friendly match. The brothers went, confident, a little cocky, and, naturally, it went terribly. They were forced to play in impossible courts. Their equipment was rigged. The gods of Xibalba cheated constantly, and worse, stylishly. Eventually, the brothers lost. One was killed, the other decapitated. Their heads were hung in a tree, which miraculously began to bear fruit. The first calabash gourds, each resembling a skull. And from one of those gourds, the maiden Exquic was miraculously impregnated. Don't think too hard about the logistics. Mythology rarely rewards close reading. Her children, the second set of twins, were Hunahpu and Xbalanque. 2. Childhood, with a bit of destiny. The twins grew up clever, mischievous, and strangely good at sports. They hunted birds with blowguns, played practical jokes on the local wildlife, and generally annoyed the neighbors. All perfectly normal behavior, except for the part where they also performed small miracles and casually resurrected things. But they had inherited more than skill. They had inherited their father's unfinished game. The noise of their own matches soon reached the underworld again. And once more, the gods of Xibalba sent a message. Come play with us. Which, to be fair, is an admirably polite way to start a mythic death trap. 3. Down to Xibalba. To reach Xibalba, you had to travel down steep rivers, one of blood, one of pus. Cross a canyon of sharp blades. And then survive several houses of trial. These included the House of Darkness, where no one could see. The House of Jaguars, where, well, there were jaguars. And my personal favorite, the House of Bats. Because nothing says divine test like a swarm of blind mammals. The twins, being clever, used tricks and illusions to survive each test. They lit torches made of fireflies. They fed bones to the jaguars. They hid inside their blowguns to avoid decapitation. In fact, that last trick saved only one of them. Hunahpu lost his head when a giant bat, Kamisats, the death bat, swooped down and took it clean off. The gods of Xibalba then used his head as the ball in the next day's match. It's hard to imagine a more literal example of putting your head in the game. 4. Outplaying death. But these were not ordinary twins. They didn't win by strength, or by pleading with the gods. They won by creativity, by turning death itself into theater. Xbalanque tricked the underworld gods into returning his brother's head by substituting a carved pumpkin. Then, when the match resumed, the twins began to lose on purpose. Playing badly, fumbling, letting the gods think victory was theirs. The lords of Xibalba grew cocky, laughing, mocking them. So the twins changed the rules. They began performing miracles, burning things that came back to life. Sacrificing themselves and reappearing. Turning death into illusion. The gods of Xibalba, impressed and deeply confused, asked to be shown how the trick worked. So the twins obliged. They killed the gods. And didn't bring them back. That's one way to win a match. Having defeated death through performance, the twins rose back to the heavens. One becoming the sun, the other the moon. And balance was restored. 5. The moral, more or less. It's a strange story. Part sport, part myth, part cosmic comedy. But in that story, you can see everything the Maya believed about the world. That life and death were not enemies, but teammates. That wit could outmatch power. And that even in the underworld, the game must go on. It's no wonder the Maya ballgame became sacred. Every bounce of the ball was a retelling of that myth. The sun dying and being reborn. the players risking everything to keep the cosmos in balance. And every time a match ended, every time a ball stopped rolling and fell silent on the stone, it was said to echo faintly, like the last heartbeat of the hero twins, still resonating through time. Soft music swells, flutes, gentle drums, fading into night sounds. So when we look at those ruined ball courts today, overgrown with vines and shadows, we're not just looking at stone. We're looking at the memory of a story. One told in every thud of the ball, every carved serpent, every echo in the walls. It wasn't a game about competition. It was a prayer in motion. A promise that as long as someone kept playing, the world would keep turning. Quiet pause. A long breath. In the next part, we'll drift into the real courts of stone. The ones still standing in Köpen, Uxmal, and Chichen Itza. We'll explore how the Maya built them to echo, to align with the stars, and to make sure the gods could always hear the sound of the ball, no matter how far away they drifted. For now, let the story rest, and maybe picture the twins, their game finished, walking calmly into the sky. If you ever visit a Maya city, you'll notice something curious. In the middle of the plazas, among the temples and carved stelae, there's almost always a long, open rectangle. Low walls. A narrow alley between them. At each end, perhaps a sloping terrace. It looks oddly athletic, like the ghost of a stadium that forgot its audience. That, of course, is the ball court. The stage where myth became motion. 1. The shape of ritual. Maya ball courts were not identical, but they followed a familiar pattern. 2 parallel walls, often shaped like a capital I. The playing alley sat between them. And on the walls, you'd find sloping stone surfaces. That helped the rubber ball bounce at unpredictable angles. Because why not make life harder for everyone involved? The space was sacred geometry. Every measurement, every slope, was aligned to celestial order, the movement of the sun, the rhythm of the seasons, the invisible logic of the cosmos. It wasn't just architecture. It was a map of heaven and earth, stitched together with limestone. 2. The sound that spoke to the sky. Here's where it gets quietly astonishing. If you stand in the center of a well-preserved ball court, and you clap your hands, the echo doesn't come back as one sound. It returns as several. A rapid cascade. A pattern of echoes that rise like the call of a quetzal bird. A sacred sound, believed to carry prayers to the heavens. At Chichen Itza, one of the grandest courts ever built, that echo is almost unnerving. You can whisper at one end, and the sound travels perfectly to the other, over 150 meters away. This wasn't an accident. It was acoustic engineering, ancient, precise, and reverent. Every game played there, every bounce of the heavy rubber ball, would have echoed through the air like a heartbeat. To the Maya, that sound was life. The pulse of the world. Proof that the gods were still listening. 3. The walls tell stories. If you look closely at the carvings on the side walls, you'll notice they're not decorative. They're narrative. At Chichen Itza's great ball court, one panel shows a player kneeling after the match. Another stands beside him, holding a knife. And in the next image, holding his head. Blood doesn't pour out, exactly. Instead, it becomes vines, 7 streams sprouting blossoms. To us, it looks grim. To them, it was divine renewal. The act of decapitation symbolized the release of life force, a return of blood to the earth, and of balance to the cosmos. It's not clear who was sacrificed, the winners or the losers. Different cities seem to have preferred different interpretations. In either case, someone's afterlife resume must have looked impressive. 4. The ritual of motion. The rules of the ballgame were, well, let's say flexible. Players struck the ball with hips, shoulders, or forearms. Never their hands or feet. The ball itself was made of solid rubber. sometimes weighing as much as a human head. Which, to be fair, may have been intentional. The goal? To keep it in play. And in some versions, to pass it through a narrow stone ring set high on the court wall. It sounds simple. But that ring was so high, and the ball so heavy, that scoring even once might take hours. In many cases, the match would simply continue until the gods seemed satisfied. That could mean a few minutes, or an entire day. This was not a sport designed for convenience. It was endurance made sacred. 5. Cities of the ball. From the forests of Guatemala to the plains of Mexico, hundreds of ball courts have been found. Over 1,300, in fact. Each one unique. Each one a different prayer in stone. At Copan, the walls are decorated with macaw heads, as though the birds themselves were frozen mid-flight. At Monte Alban, the court overlooks the mountains, so that every game took place halfway between sky and earth. At Uxmal, the ring bears the image of intertwined serpents, life devouring death, death birthing life again. And at Chichen Itza, the grandest of all, the space is vast. So large, the echoes feel almost alive. You can imagine the crowd, clad in cotton and feathers, chanting softly as the players moved. The ball thudding, the air trembling, a single sound repeating across centuries. 6. Beyond sport. For the Maya, the ball game was not recreation. It was revelation. Each match symbolized the movement of the sun, its rise, its fall, its eternal return. It also reenacted the myth of the hero twins. Life, death, and rebirth played out under the gaze of the gods. When the ball struck the wall, it was the sun striking the horizon. When it passed through the ring, it was the triumph of light over darkness. Every match, in essence, was a cosmic negotiation. And for those who played, it was an act of devotion so profound that even losing might mean immortality. 7. Silence, the final score. Now imagine the end of such a match. The final echo fades. The players, drenched in sweat and incense, bow their heads to the stars. The night closes in. The torches dim, and the stone walls return to their quiet vigil. Thousands of years later, they still stand that way, holding silence where once the world's heartbeat echoed. It's strange to think that so much meaning was bound up in the bounce of a ball. But perhaps that's the quiet brilliance of the Maya. They found eternity in motion, and holiness in rhythm. Soft music rises, a low drum beat, distant birds, fading into wind. Let's drift, now, from the courts themselves to the people who played. The captains, the nobles, the chosen few, whose bodies were offerings, and whose movements shaped religion, politics, and fate. In the next part, we'll step softly into the ritual life of the players. What they wore, how they trained, and what it meant to be touched by the game that touched the gods. Until then, let the echoes fade, and the stone remember. The Maya ballgame wasn't a pastime. It was a privilege, and sometimes, a sentence. The men who played were chosen, not for fame, not for fortune, but because they carried something the rest did not. Perhaps strength, perhaps grace, perhaps simply the willingness to face the gods on their own stone stage. Let's drift closer to them. 1. The players of the sun. In most cities, the players were nobles, sometimes even kings themselves. They trained from youth, their bodies honed not for beauty, but for endurance. The game demanded power. Hips strong enough to strike a ball of solid rubber, weighing nearly 10 pounds. To survive, it was to earn respect. To excel at it was to earn sanctity. When a ruler played, it wasn't for entertainment. It was theater. A declaration that he was the bridge between mortals and gods. His sweat became offering. His bruises, blessings. 2. Rituals before the game. The preparation was almost priestly. Before a match, players would fast. They would purify themselves in steam baths. The Temazcal, a stone chamber filled with vapor and sacred herbs. Their bodies were painted with ochre and black, symbols of night and rebirth. Feathers and jade beads adorned their arms, not for vanity, but as signs of divine connection. Sometimes, they carried charms, tiny carved figures of gods, tucked against the heart, so that courage might not waver. And of course, there were prayers. Quiet ones, whispered not to win, but to be worthy of the game. 3. The armor of the devout. The attire of a ballplayer was improvised, but meaningful. Thick leather belts and padding around the hips, sometimes reinforced with wood or cloth. A yoke-shaped piece, carved or bound, to protect the waist and guide the ball's rebound. Knee pads, wrist guards, and elaborate headdresses that defied both logic and gravity. Each item was symbolic. The belt represented the horizon, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead. When the ball struck that belt and returned to play, it wasn't just a rebound. It was the sun, rising once more. 4. The body as offering. And yet, for all that preparation, the game was brutal. Imagine a 10-pound rubber ball striking your ribs, your thigh, your shoulder, again and again, for hours. Archaeologists have found carvings of players with ribs wrapped, arms bandaged, and knees scarred from impact. In many ways, the ballgame was both a sport and a slow ritual of pain. To endure it was to prove devotion. To fall from exhaustion was to be human. And sometimes, that was exactly the point. 5. The politics of play. The ballgame was never just about religion. It was also politics, wrapped in pageantry. Two rival cities might agree to settle disputes, not with armies, but with a single game. Victory could mean tribute, or prestige, or the right to rule. The losing side, well, they might lose more than pride. A captured noble could be forced to play, his defeat predetermined, his final moment witnessed by the gods. In a world where war and ritual were intertwined, the ball court was simply another battlefield, one paved with symbolism instead of blood. Or, sometimes, with both. 6. When kings played with fate. Some rulers were said to have stepped onto the court themselves. One inscription from Köppen shows a king, adorned in the regalia of a ball player. The ball mid-bounce before him. Was he truly playing? Or performing a divine drama before his people? It hardly matters. The effect was the same. When a king took the field, it wasn't sport. It was cosmic choreography. He became the sun, the ball, the moon, the court, the sky itself. And every rebound was another turn of the universe. It's a quiet sort of majesty, and perhaps a lonely one. 7. The moment of sacrifice. There's a question historians still debate. Who was sacrificed, the winners, or the losers? The Maya left us hints, but not certainties. Some carvings show victorious players offering themselves, their heads adorned with glory. Others show captives, defeated, bound, and ready. Either way, the act was not seen as punishment. To be chosen, to have your blood returned to the gods, was the highest honor imaginable. It meant you had played well enough to catch divine attention. And that, in the Maya world, was worth everything. 8. The aftermath. After the match, the court would fall silent again. The spectators drifted home. The incense burned low. And somewhere, in the temples above, priests recorded the day's omens. Which constellation rose? Which bird cried first? How the ball bounced in its final arc? Because every movement had meaning. Every echo mattered. Even in loss. There was something sacred. The court was the spine of the cosmos. And those who played upon it were the nerves that carried its pulse. 9. Memory in motion. Thousands of years later, the courts still stand. Stone rings peer down at the jungle canopy, their purpose long silenced. But when the wind moves just right, when leaves whisper across the alley, you could almost imagine the ball still rolling. And somewhere, in the warmth of the Yucatan dusk, the ghosts of the players still move. Not in sorrow, not in pain, but in rhythm. Because to play Pak Tapak was to live as part of the universe's great heartbeat. And that, truly, never ends. Soft music fades, a bamboo flute, then silence. We'll rest here for a moment. At the edge of the court, where sweat met starlight, and time folded into eternity. In the next part, we'll drift through how this sacred game survived, how it changed under new gods, new empires, and new names. Because Pak Tapak never really died. It just learned to hide.